Hello and welcome to the AI Vantage. I'm your host, Salim Hasham. We often talk about the history of technology in terms of revolutionary inventions: the printing press, the steam engine, the internet. Each one fundamentally changed how we live and work. Today, we stand at the dawn of another such era, powered by AI. But to truly grasp where we're going, we need to understand where it all began. That's why I'm thrilled to have Trish Warkentin from Google DeepMind with us today. His journey is intertwined with the very fabric of modern AI, from the birth of the transformer model to landmark products like Bard and Imagine. We're going to get to the heart of what agentic AI really means, moving beyond the buzzwords to what it looks like when AI transitions from a simple tool to a true collaborator. We'll explore the future of business, society, and humanity itself in this new agentic age. If you're ready to look beyond the horizon, this conversation is for you. Let's get going. Beyond the AI hype lies your next big opportunity. I'm Salim Hasham, Director of AI Transformation at Google Cloud, where I bring more than 2 decades of working with CEOs and their leadership teams to deliver business impact. Join me as I sit down with the brightest minds from Google, our partners, and customers to share real-world stories and proven strategies for AI success. This is your seat at the table. Welcome to the AI Vantage.
Let's get some spicy questions, huh?
Absolutely.
All right.
So Trish, on my way here, when I landed at SFO, driving towards Silicon Valley, of course, every company is a tech company and every advert is an AI advert, but there's one that caught my mind. And I think it was AI from the company that invented AI, right, which to me is your story. And so probably one of the most exciting episodes we're going to have is sort of diving behind the curtain. And so let's talk about the human behind the AI. Can you maybe help our audience understand a little bit about your journey and how that journey has been the sort of evolution of AI?
Well, that's very kind. I obviously cannot claim to be one of the guys that invented AI, but I've been lucky enough to work on some of the coolest things, I think, in the history of Google research. And so I'm really excited to come and talk to you. First of all, thank you for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. For the past 6 or so years, I've worked in the AI research field. And originally I worked on TensorFlow, so our first sort of full framework and toolkit to make sure that you could build end-to-end production machine learning systems and now AI systems as well. And in that I worked on the ecosystem portion. So how is it that we bring everybody, hopefully you watching and everybody around the world along for this journey and make it possible for you to both build great models, understand how to productionize those, et cetera. And we actually see a lot of those in Google Cloud now. So if you've used Google Cloud Pipelines or you've used a lot of the tools in Vertex AI, a lot of them came out of that phase of AI development, which is really great. And then after that, I worked on Google Brain. So you may have heard of Google Brain, which was the foundational research lab where the transformer was invented. And there I got to work on great foundational projects that you probably have heard of, including the Pathways language models, the largest large transformer-based models trained in the world at the time. And I worked on original text-to-image models, first diffusion models from Google Imagine. And then I also led PM for Lambda when it was a sentient model, which now we look back on with a smile and a bit of a laugh. But you know, that was a really wonderful project that then gave root to Bard and now Gemini, which I think is a huge step forward for the company and hopefully for the world as well.
Absolutely. So let's demystify generative AI a little bit, but I do want to spend the majority of our time on agentic. And so you've seen that journey, sort of the deterministic machine learning suddenly evolves and becomes probabilistic, this idea of the beginning of reasoning. How does that work?
So maybe I'll take a little bit of an issue with that because actually I think in general, almost all machine learning is probabilistic in some sense. Right. And so, yes, there can be deterministic actions in models, and that's really important. That's part of optimization science as well. I think how does the magic happen is a great question. One of my favorite things to tell people is that machine learning AI, they're not magic. Right. It's not magic, it's just math. Right? When you think about it, a computer is actually just a very, very fast adding machine. And so I think the magic behind it is turning very, very fast adding into something that really feels like magic. And so part of that is about how we build better foundations of science on fundamental math. But part of it is also how we make that something that's useful for users. And that's one of my own core passions, is taking something that could exist in science and trying to transform it into something that you can use to improve your business, that you can use to improve your life and your relationship.
That's fantastic. So let's sort of continue on the theme of alchemy and mercurial magic, but make it a little bit more real. And so generative AI that everybody's used to requires a human to prompt. And so there's an input and it will do some magic and give you an output. Agentic's a little bit different, right? So we're all told that Agentic can reason, it can plan, and it can mostly autonomously execute. So what is that alchemy? Like, what is the thing about Agentic that allows it to learn and do things?
At its heart, I think Agentic should be AI, real intelligence that helps you do things better, that does stuff on your behalf, autonomously potentially, or also with supervision. And this is part of a broader arc of the shift from what I consider to be human-computer interaction, but to human-computer collaboration. And so I think the real change there is now AI models, they're smart enough to actually use themselves, to work in iterative loops, to refine a problem space,
right,
to focus in on the things that they should actually be doing and to actually take actions. And the real challenge from here is, how do we actually make that happen? And so I often like to think of this like the early days of the internet. You know, in 1998, and this is going to surprise you, I was a nerd back in the day, and I really believed that the internet was going to solve everything.
Right.
You know, it was going to solve commerce, and it was going to solve communications, and it was going to be the future of entertainment and work, and it was going to erase borders, and it was going to do so many things. And I think fundamentally looking back, not to pat myself on the back too hard, I think that's right. Mm-hmm. It just didn't happen in 1998.
No.
And it wasn't fundamentally the internet itself that unlocked those by itself as a technological concept. It was by interaction with society. It was really a change in society and our norms and habits. And I think that's very true for Agentic as well. So agents are going to do many, many things in our lives. And I think you're going to wake up in 10 years and you're going to wonder how we lived without AI being able to do things on our behalves. But I think it's going to be a negotiation and a societal shift as much as it is a technological shift.
Makes perfect sense. So let's just maybe pull the thread on that a little bit. When we talk about agents, and many of our audience, I think, will understand the term, but maybe not understand what an agent is. And you and I had great debates about Agentic being maybe just an extension of generative. But let's just sort of start with a definition that everyone can understand, and I'd love to sort of go from there.
Yeah, so I think that my definition of agents, I like to keep it a little bit narrower, and that is AI that will take actions on behalf of a user, either by being prompted by a user or as a result of context around the model and the user.
Right.
So I'll give an example. One of my dreams is that if I'm going on a business trip and I know that my flight is in, 3 hours, that actually my own agent will look at my calendar and will say, oh, if you're going to get to the airport on time, you need to leave in 20 minutes. And it will actually call the car for me. It will actually call a cab because it knows that I normally would take an Uber or a Lyft or a Waymo for this ride, and it will actually figure out what is good for me. And rather than me having to explicitly prompt it, it will have iterative loops where it will be able to reason about the context and the shifting times and your situation. Wow. And so I think that is a really powerful concept and something that fundamentally does not exist in computing today.
Because today we have to prompt it. It doesn't do it by itself. So what is reasoning? How does that actually work?
Reasoning is really interesting. One of the most fascinating parts of the last 5 years from a research perspective to me is watching non-believers become believers about reasoning. And, you can argue philosophy on this, right? Is it really reasoning or is it mimicking reasoning? Is it just very sophisticated stochastic parrots? I'm not here to opine on the philosophy, though I would love to have that argument with you some other time.
That's another episode for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think fundamentally reasoning is an approximation of a thought process that can be effective in getting from the front of a task to the back of a task, the beginning of a task to the end of a task. That's very relevant for Agentic because I could write you a good snippet for an email or something along those lines. That's kind of a task. That's a generative AI task. But if I want to take an action, I want to, send a note to my team that I'm going to be running a little bit late. There's actually a series of actions that it has to take completely fidelitously. It needs to be accurate. in order for it to be something that's trustworthy for users and for businesses. And I think that's a key element of why reasoning is the missing element that now makes the agentic era truly possible.
Right. So let's ground that. And so when you and I have talked about agentic transformations, right? And so we all do this for a living, but I think you have a really clear perspective on agentic as an end state, right? So there's the misconception of the magic bullet that agents will solve everything. And I think you have a really interesting perspective that says it's a bit of a stepwise journey. To help us understand the DNA of an agentic transformation.
Yeah, so we get to see these all the time. I think everybody across the industry, some of our best partners are really involved in transforming their entire business to a much more agentic focus. The fundamentals of it are, you need to realize that it's not going to be a 1-year journey. It probably isn't going to be a 2-year journey. And in fact, I think in 5 years, we'll still be changing things about the way that agents interact with your systems, about the level of control and safety that we provide to users. How is it that we actually architect these systems? For me, the most important part of an agentic transformation is looking forward and having a clear idea of what you want the business outcome of agents to be, and then matching that to the technical reality of what's possible today and what you could reasonably expect to be technically possible along the timeline of your adoption curve. And so, again, I think that when you look across the market, there are many people building support agents or sales agents, things like that. That makes a lot of sense because it's the beginning of a funnel in many ways. It's the beginning of a customer interaction, but they're very complex journeys. And we're seeing often that for very simple sorts of support queries, it makes sense because you can defray 80% of your risk for 10% of the cost, right? But for deep understanding of why customers experience your product this way, for rolling that back in, I think those are different agentic journeys. And so we see the most thoughtful enterprises and users right now really engaging deeply in what does it mean if my business is driven by agents for significant portions in 5 to 10 years. What does that look like on a 1-year time frame, on a 2-year time frame, right? And really aggressively building towards that technological future, because since we're very early, we still have a lot of flexibility in the way that we roll these out. And so I think that people who act now are really ahead of the curve, honestly. And I think that that's going to pay dividends for the next decade.
Perfect. And can you share maybe with the audience a couple of examples of agentic transformations that you're seeing today? Like, how real is this?
I think it's real. I would still characterize the agentic transformation era as being early, right? You've never probably had an AI that's rescheduled a meeting for you or that's called you a cab or something along these lines, right?
I would love one that does.
I would as well, but I think those are technically fully possible right now. Right. And so how is it that we do not the part where we all believe that the internet's going to solve all these things, but how do we do the real ditch digging, the important, hard, grungy work of integrating society, our tools, understanding how that pays out for the market? How is it that we spread the economic rewards, that can work as a partnership across the ecosystem? I think we're still trying to figure that out. The places I see it being most effective right now are really in knowledge journeys. When I look at how do people understand optimization of their own systems, for example, one of the things that I really believe is that Google has really gotten its last several 10Xs from optimization science, and in one era, perhaps linear regression, and another 10X from logistic regression, and then another from deep learning, the real deep learning revolution from TensorFlow on. And hopefully the next 10 to 100X is generative AI and agentic. That's what we're all working towards. But I actually think when you look across the industry, those gains have not been realized by most people.
So you think industry still has a catch-up period before they even get to parity?
I think absolutely that's true, but my hope is that agents and modern AI will make that so much easier. Imagine that you're running an e-commerce business and you want to do price optimization, a dynamic price optimization by region, maybe personalized price optimization. Maybe you have supply chain optimization that you need to do. There are hundreds of companies and models and ways that you could engage with that, but it's so deep, so difficult, so confusing that it's really hard for those companies to move into a highly optimized era along this sort of last 3 10Xs. And I think agents can do that fundamentally for companies that you could have an optimization agent that looks across your supply chain, that looks across your pricing strategy, that looks across a promotion strategy or a rollout strategy, go-to-market, internationalization. So many areas where specific agents could really provide optimization help for companies, for users. And I think that's true in enterprise, but I think it's also true of our personal lives. So that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and even in my own personal work, and I think over 100 transformations, we're seeing customers look at specific areas. It could be customer experience or somewhere in the front, middle, or back office, but these are sort of point solutions that are agentic, to your point, not agents. And so if we pull that thread, I don't know, 3, maybe 5 years, is the vision that a company is going to be hundreds of agents operating independently within a company, negotiating with agents outside of a company? And if that's the case, what are sort of the complications, and what are you in DeepMind driving from a research perspective that makes that a reality, right? We have agent to agent. So started down that journey, but where does that lead, and how is Google engineering for the future?
I love this question. I can't say we have all the answers. Just to be totally clear, I think, one of the things that I really believe is that this is a research area still, and that there's lots of research that will disrupt the way that we think about these. Fundamentally, I do believe that you will have hundreds of agents working at your company, interacting with hundreds of agents, working for your partners, for clients, et cetera. And that will be a bedrock technology for the next era of business. However, I'm also extremely optimistic that over time, the history of enterprise is that we make things more efficient. Of course. Just in the last 30 odd years of computing, we've probably made software engineers 100x more efficient than they were, just that in that short time period, relatively short to humanity time period. And I think fundamentally, when we make people more effective, we find more interesting things for them to do. And we're seeing that in these transformations right now inside of Google and with our best partners, that people are finding new opportunities, new market verticals to attach to, new opportunities to partner, new ways to expand those partnerships. And so it's really an accelerant. I think people are afraid of, oh my goodness, this business that I have right now is going to change. Well, guess what? Your business is always changing. Yeah. And this can be an accelerant to you helping your business change, to taking that market condition and making it into real lemonade. You could see it as lemons and lemonade, but I actually see this as like a real opportunity to build a completely new type of economy for almost all enterprises.
And you're right. It took 50 years for the Industrial Revolution to become normalized, and we saw benefit. The internet did it in 20 years.
Yeah.
Feels like Gen AI has done it in 3 years.
Yeah.
And so what's driving that speed and that pace of adoption?
I think a lot of it is that we're resting on the shoulders of giants. Right. Fundamentally, the internet is such a great scaling mechanism, and we work with millions of people worldwide. One of the things that I believe in the most is the power of humanity and developers and users to provide good feedback and real direction that can make our work at Google better, that can make work at every company better, that can make society better. And when I look at how that's rolling out, how do we engage with users? How do we really listen to users is one of the most salient questions to our work inside of Google DeepMind. One of the projects that I'm lucky enough to work on is Gemma, our open models program. And so to answer your scaling question, how can we do this so fast? We came up with the idea of Gemma really not that long ago. It's about 1.5 years old at this point, since we launched Gemma 1. And we've seen 300 million or so down.
300 million.
And you think about the distribution, how many things in humanity have touched 300 million population, right?
With that network effect, very few.
Right. And so, what's the scaling mechanism for that? It's not that I went and knocked on everyone's door and I said, hey, you should use open models and you could build a new future of intelligence for your business and a new future of intelligence with the community, and we could make research way better, right? It was that the internet has scaling things because we figured out that ecosystem play that I mentioned, the thing that makes sure that everybody in the value chain is appropriately rewarded, in my opinion. And so I think that's the real engine. I'm a product manager, so one of my fundamental beliefs is that show me the incentives that you have, and I'll tell you the successes or problems that you're going to find, right? And in this case, I think the biggest problem that we have to overcome is how do we make sure that that value chain is aligned for people, for businesses, for platforms, for governments, for all of society. And we take that very seriously inside of Google DeepMind. So that's one of the things that really keeps me working here, honestly.
Fantastic. And so as we think about this agentic future, one of the questions I get most asked by our partners and our customers is it one model? Is it many models? Is it open source? Is it proprietary? Is it distilled? I feel like the answer is everything, but from what you've seen, how do we think about applying the right model for the right job versus the complexity of too many of these things?
It's such a good question, and one that I think the industry overall is wrestling with quite a lot. Maybe I'll turn it back to you. How many models in computers does it take when you do a Google search?
I would hate to guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably in that 100 milliseconds.
1 in a million.
Yeah, exactly. In that 100 milliseconds, between the time you hit enter or you say, hey Google, give me this answer, in that 100 milliseconds or so, you're interacting with hundreds of computers, right? You're going through every hop on the internet.
Right.
It hits a Google firewall. It gets distributed to, hey, is this a geo-relevant query? Is this are there ads that are relevant for this query? Can we show you a knowledge panel? Is this about a celebrity? It's amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter to you. That's all Google to you.
It's a leprechaun behind the curtain.
It certainly is. And so, I think it's important that we get the technical infrastructure right, but more important is that we don't burden people, businesses, and everyone else with a lot of that technical complexity. And so that's actually one of the things I'm most excited about is that AI infrastructure is really becoming simplified enough that we can scale it to so many more people, right? You can go to gemini.google.com and you can interact with the world's best state-of-the-art models for free that use cutting-edge research that were incredibly difficult to train and tune and get right. And we try to make that something that's beneficial for everybody, right? And I think that hiding that complexity, or not hiding, but abstracting away that complexity is one of the key values that we bring as a company, Google, and hopefully that we drive across the industry while still making it so that everybody can participate.
Perfect. And so AI, and I guess increasingly agentic, is solving some of the world's most complex problems, right? It's what AlphaFold is doing for life sciences. I know that you're involved in sort of Waymo and the future of self-driving. So many things that Google is working on that I think are fundamentally game-changing. I'd like to flip the question. What do you think are the biggest challenges and risks in the next 3 to 5 years? And what are we doing, and what advice can you give to our partners and customers as they think about the adoption journey?
It's a really difficult question and very interesting. One of the things that I work on is AGI research. So on the path to AGI, how do we get that right? How do we measure that? And you mentioned Waymo a little bit. We released a paper a couple of years ago at this point, I think, where we tried to define AGI and ASI in terms of hierarchy, of a real way to categorize what level of AGI we're at. And so very much like self-driving, simple cruise control is self-driving to some extent, but of course you probably shouldn't take your hands off the wheel for more than a second if you have that kind of technology. Whereas I get in a Waymo and I am constantly amazed at just how much better of a driver it is than I am. I think, to some extent, the risks, I'm a lot less worried right now about the AGI risks, because I think the problem is the pace of technology development. We're seeing such fast progress in AI. I think it prevents novel surfaces for bad things to happen. And so I really worry about things like media authenticity, because when I look at videos across the internet, is that video real? It used to be pics or it didn't happen. Now it can be pics or it didn't happen, right? There is no way in many ways, like as a user right now, to really understand that loop. And we're working on that very much. We try to make sure that we're identifying all of the things that we generate as being authentic or being model generated or whatever. And we also work with C2PA, which is a content authority. So to try to make it so that across the internet, you'll be able to tell when things are verifiably human created, or whether they were captured by a camera, or whether they were, modified by Nano Banana or something along those lines, right? So I worry about that. And then I think, humans are almost always the weakest link in any security chain. And so I worry about things like spear phishing, your mom calling you with an emergency, right? And it sounds like your mom and it can talk back to you in a way that might actually be like your mom.
Right.
But it's not. It's a computer and it's trying to trick you. And I think that sort of stuff worries me quite a bit. And we have many security and counter abuse teams that are trying to make sure that we're rolling out changes. And so it's an important thing that we do, not just as Google, but across society, working with governments and industry groups and many, many other security researchers from across.
And that's a great segue. So I think everyone's familiar of DeepMind being the Nobel Prize-winning research and development arm that brings us innovation, perhaps not as aware of some of the things that you're doing to think about the bigger picture, humanity, society, and the impact that we have and trying to solve those. So maybe just give us one or two quick examples of what that looks like and what you're excited about.
I think I am absolutely amazed at the progress in science and math. Like when I look at, some of these mathematics competitions, some of these coding competition type models, Alpha Proof and Alpha Evolve, and then, some of these, they really show promise for how can we use AI to improve the pace of scientific endeavor? Because, I think that in the next, 20 years, there will be an AI that wins a Nobel Prize independently written, right? I think that's an amazing phenomenon. It's crazy to think about to some extent, right? But I think we're not that far from being able to discover completely novel science at scale and to accelerate the pace of adopting that science. And so I think that's really cool. I think, some of my favorites, to be very specific, we do material science work inside of Google DeepMind that I'm really proud of. I think that work is just amazing because most people don't care about how things like batteries are made, for example. But if you built a better crystal for your, lithium ion batteries that made them 50% more efficient, that's a huge bottleneck for the world. And it's so much pollution and many other things. I think we're also at the point where, we have major climate change and climate related AI research as well. Things like understanding wildfires with satellites that we launch into space, FireSat project. Things like that are absolutely amazing because I think they have the fundamental ability to change what it's like to live on Earth, right? And so I'm really excited about those. But most of all, I'm really excited about medicine because I think that there are so many diseases. We fundamentally don't understand how major parts of biology work. And I think we're really at the cusp. We're very close to being able to use AI more substantively in the way that we did with AlphaFold, in the way that we're doing for therapeutics with isomorphic labs, to really revolutionize what it means to give care, to prevent disease, to understand the development of disease, to understand genetic impacts of disease markers, for example, right? And so I think those are some of the most exciting areas that we work on. Unfortunately, not something that I personally do as much on, but things that I'm really inspired by around Google DeepMind.
That's fantastic. And it's such an exciting time to be in AI. I think we could be talking for days, but what I'd love to do is wrap with a bit of a fun question, right? So, Trish, if you were in front of the gods of AI on your knees and you had one wish, what mystery would you want AI to solve?
I love this. I can only choose one.
You can choose just one now.
I think I'll go back actually to the mysteries of life. I actually think understanding the brain, understanding life, understanding how life came about and where it's going and why we see the problems that we do in biology in society. I think those all have a really solid fundamental biological understanding at their root. I think if I could be really crisp, I would really want to, one miracle, understand exactly how the human brain works. And because I don't think that what we're building is anything like the human brain. I actually think machine learning models, people sometimes equate them to the brain, but I actually think they're fundamentally quite different right now. But we haven't learned probably 10% of what we should have learned or what we could have learned from the human brain in order to make machine intelligence better. And so if I could, that would be what I would ask for.
And that would be Google's third Nobel Prize, hopefully for you in the future.
Oh man, I have a funny story about that actually. I was supposed to meet with Demis on the first thing in the morning on the day that he was called away to get his Nobel Prize. You know, his admin called me. I'm sorry, we're gonna have to reschedule. He's on his way to get his Nobel Prize. Priorities, Demis, please. What am I, chopped liver? Anyway, yeah. So it's really humbling to be able to work with people that really are leading into the future. And so, and I consider this conversation one of those kinds of conversations. I really appreciate you having me.
Trish, it's been such a pleasure, and thank you for sharing your time and your insight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us, and please tune in as we continue to explore the AI Vantage.
Thank you for tuning in to the AI Vantage. Be sure to follow us on social. If you're interested in learning more about the Google Partner Ecosystem, visit the address on the screen below. Remember, the best way to predict the future is to build it. See you next time.